Oh crap, that's gas.
So you've never ridden a bike with a carburetor before, like this Honda Magna, or even like this 98 Yamaha R1, which in today's world of port injection, direct injection, and all this extra stuff is fairly reasonable. But you have your eyes on a marketplace deal, and you really don't know what to expect with a carbureted motorcycle. Is it a headache? Is it reliable? Is it slow? Will it break down immediately? Stick around to the end so we can discuss carb bikes and get you started on your first ride on a carbureted motorcycle. The very first thing you must know about carbureted bikes like this R1 is simply this. If you've heard they don't like to start, they don't like to run, some of you may have even heard they run better than modern bikes, well, it's all true. Take this 1995 Honda Magna, for example. This is my first bike. It has 4 carburetors, and from day one, whether it's hot or cold outside, it likes to be choked to turn on the first start of the day. Doesn't matter what temperature it is outside.
And if you don't use the choke, this happens. But if you pull this thing right here, which is a choke, boom, fires right up.
And for all you people out there, some of you may not know, what the choke does essentially is give a little bit more fuel to the bike when you first turn it on to help it fire and get started. That's fuel, but more on maintenance and reliability later in the video. But to make this even more confusing, this is my wife's 1995 Honda Magna. Same bike, same year, same carbs.
Somehow, this bike with no choke, well,
this makes no sense at all, does it? How can the same bike start differently in the same situation?
well, that's character. That all elusive thing that old bikes have that can make 2 of the same bike be completely different. And it's normal.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with either of these 2 machines. Part of the annoyance is that you, as a rider, have to get to know your machine and how to work with it. Nowadays, you can just click a button and let the ECU do all the learning. How to start in the cold, how to start in the warm, which is convenient, but does not make you as connected to your machine. So now that you have your old beast started, maybe with a little choke, maybe without, you have to let it warm up for a little bit. Older bikes usually don't have fuel pumps like modern bikes do. Gravity's usually doing the work from getting the fuel from the gas tank to the carbs themselves. If any of you know how fluids work, it takes longer to move when it's colder, which is why on a cold winter morning, your bike sounds like this if you don't let it warm up. Yet, when it runs for a few moments, the same bike sounds like this. That is way more snappy and responsive. This is something you have to get a feel for. The rule of thumb is the colder it is outside, the longer you have to let the bike run. I live in Florida and it's mid-September, it's 85 degrees outside, it may only take 1 or 2 minutes. But in the winter, when it's 30 or 40 degrees, it may take 5 to 6 minutes to even run without the choke. And again, these things are prima donnas, and your specific bike may be a little bit different. You actually have to get to know it. But once you learn how to crank the bike and let it warm up for just a few minutes, you're ready to ride. So let's go for a spin.
The first thing you notice when you ride a carbureted motorcycle is that the throttle seems to be a little bit heavier than modern bikes with fuel injection. That's because this bike has a cable that's actually turning throttle bodies that actually have weights and springs and resistance, so there's a little bit more weight to the throttle. But another thing that you're actually going to notice as well is that the bike seems to be more responsive to your inputs. It seems that exactly what you're doing here is exactly what's happening with the bike. Every little bit of input is correlating to what's happening on the bike, and it's more responsive to smaller bits of input. Newer bikes, for some reason, always feel like they take a second to rev, like there's a delay between what you're doing with your wrist and what's happening on the bike. You get used to it and you stop paying attention to it, but it's not a fact of life. Carbureted bikes don't do that.
The big scare for most people is maintenance and upkeep, and this bike, as you can see, is clearly leaking fuel. The gaskets sealing fuel inside the carburetors are leaking. This is fairly common when bikes age. This Magna has had those gaskets replaced, so it shouldn't leak for years to come. The thing that you need to understand is that old is, well, old. It's not because the bike has carbs that fuel leaks. It has to do with age. These things are made up of rubber hoses, seals, and plastic pipes that just get brittle and decay over time. But it's actually the same thing on fuel-injected motorcycles. The rubber seals, the rubber O-rings, they tend to leak, and it leaks pressure up back past the rail or from the cylinder head. And also the plastic lines and clips that lead to your motorcycle's fuel rails and fuel pumps, those tend to break over time too. It's more to do with age than the fact that the motorcycle is carbureted. If a carbureted bike has been ridden and not sat for years on end, it probably runs perfectly fine. Even this bike, once it leaks fuel for a few minutes, the seals actually swell and it stops leaking. I just haven't done my part to replace them over time or to keep it running consistently and turn it on once a week. If I do that, it actually doesn't leak and it doesn't have any issues. The seals still do need to be replaced, but it's just a Band-Aid on a problem that I just haven't fixed. If you happen to get an older motorcycle that hasn't run in a while, I would definitely suggest getting the carbs looked at. If you're hands-on, you can do it yourself, but there's plenty of mechanics out there that know how to work on these things, and carb work is relatively cheap and inexpensive on most motorcycles. If you happen to get a bike that's running and has been regularly loved, you probably won't need to touch it as long as you continue to use the bike fairly regularly. Always remember, old bikes rule. If you take care of your old bike, it will take care of you. If you like classic bike reviews, check out this video right here for a Honda Magna, this video right here for my first generation R1, and this video right here for a not so old but still carbureted Harley Davidson.